Hello everyone, welcome back to Edubbey Global Solution. Today we'll be discussing differences in economic development between countries. In our first slide here, we have one true or false question and the definition of economic development. First, did economic growth different from economic development? Remember, we said our economic growth is an increase in the amount of goods and services produced over a period of time. Now, what do we mean by our economic development? Our economic development refers to the increases in the economic welfare of people through growth in the productive scale and wealth of an economy. In this case, economic growth is different from economic development. Now let us check here. If we move to the next slide, we now have what is known as developed and underdeveloped economies. Which country do we categorize under development and under developed economy? That is where we have low GDP capital here, that is gross domestic product per capita, poor infrastructure, low literacy rate or poor health and education. Where we also have high gross domestic product per capita, high literacy rate and high productivity, large sector and high life expectancy. Now let us drag it into the boxes. We have developed economies to be the one that has high GDP per capita, high literacy rate, high productivity, large tertiary sector, and high expectancy. While underdeveloped economies are categorized by a very low GDP per capita, poor infrastructure, low literacy rate, and poor health care and education. Let us check here. We got it right. Now let us move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we have one past question here. What distinguishes a more developed country from a less developed country? Here we have the natural resources are higher in the more developed country. Is that so? Inflation rates are higher in the more developed economy or country. Real incomes are higher in the more developed country, or the interest rates are higher in the more developed country. Of course, the real income, that is the GDP per capita, are higher in the more developed country. Now we move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we now move to the causes of differences in economic development between countries. Why do we have different economic development across different countries? First, we have the difference in income per head. Of course, economic development tends to be lower in countries with low real GDP per head and high in countries that have high real GDP per head. Now we also have differences in saving. Of course, poor people cannot afford to save, and so the saving ratio of a country where the average income is low is likely to be low. We also have differences in investment. Of course, countries with a low value of capital good per worker will be likely to have a low income per head. We also have the differences in population growth. Of course, a country with high population growth, there is usually a high dependency ratio with a high proportion of children being dependent on a small proportion of workers. We also have differences in education and healthcare. Of course, the lack of access to or poor quality of education will reduce the quality of people as a result of low level of productivity. And then lastly, we have the differences in productivity. Of course, countries with low output per worker hour will tend to have low productivity. Now we move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we also have one past question here. Which factor in the world's low-income countries limits their economic development? Here we have the balance of payments surpluses. Is that the answer? High saving ratios, rapid population growth, or large inflows of foreign investment. Of course, the factors in the world's low-income country limits that economic development is the rapid population growth. Now we move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we now have the impact of differences in economic development. What are the effects of differences in economic development? Here we have the problem facing the low economic development, which include what we have here. We have optimum population. Is that so? Optimum population cannot be the impact of differences in economic development. We have high rate of international debt. Of course, it will cause high rate of international debt where a country has low economic development. We also have high growth of population here. Of course, rapidly expanding population due to high birth rate, less development company will reduce the real GDP per income. Here we also have underpopulation. Of course, underpopulation cannot be the factor affecting low economic development country. We also have reliance on export of what? Of primary products. Of course, they will be rely on exports when the development of the country is very low. We also have the emigration of what? Emigration of key workers. Of course, it will lead to an emigration of key workers when the development of the country is low. Now let us check. Those are the impact of difference in economic development. Now we move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we have one past question here also. A country changes to a policy of self-sufficiency in agriculture instead of relying on world supplies. What is likely to happen in the country as a result? Now, a country that changes to a policy of self-sufficiency in agriculture automatically the price of the agricultural will rise. Now we have more farmers will be unemployed, agricultural prices will rise, farm output will fall, or more food will be imported. Of course, the agricultural price will rise. Now let us move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we also have one past question related to economic development. Many low-income countries relies on multinational companies, that is MNC. I think we have touched this one earlier in our previous content, to provide economic development. What is the disadvantages of this for the low-income country? What is the disadvantages for the economy that rely on multinational companies? That is, the multinational companies have to pay taxes on their profits. Is that so? New production techniques are introduced. The balance of payment may improve. Local firms close because MNC, that is multinational companies, are more efficient. Of course, the disadvantage is the closure of the local firm because of the multinational company. Now we move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we still have one past question here. The country's Minister for Agriculture said the biggest challenge the country faces is to develop irrigation so that we are not at the mercy of the weather for crucial export earning. Which type of country is the most likely to be? Now here we have the biggest challenge for the country to develop irrigation. That means the country is developing, not more developed. It is not developed fully. It has not been developed. It is developed. Now, so that they are be able to have the mercy of the weather of crucial export earning. But here, what are they exporting? Of course, it is primary commodity related to agriculture. Here now we have the option. Here we have developed. Of course, the country is not yet developed. Are they exporting manufacturing goods? No. Now, developing exporting services? No. Developed, they are not yet developed, as I said earlier. Exporting services? No. But here we have developing and exporting primary commodity. That is our right answer. This will be the end of the class. Stay tuned to our website www.edubbey.com. See you in the next class.